Transformation in Trials. Welcome to Transformation in Trials. This is a podcast exploring all things transformational in clinical trials. Nothing is off limits on the show, and we will have guests from the whole spectrum of the clinical trials community. And we're your hosts, Ivana and Sam. Welcome to another episode of Transformation in Trials. Today we are very fortunate to have GT LaBorde, the CEO of IllumiCare, in the studio with us. Hi, GT.
Ivana, Sam, great to be with you.
Today we're going to focus on the topic of patient recruitment for clinical trials at the point of care. And first of all, I would like to ask you, GT, can you talk to us about some of the disconnects in this space? There are a lot of stakeholders, there are patients, different types of specialties, clinics, and sponsors. What's the complication there?
It's really interesting. Patients and doctors essentially want the same thing, but there's a barrier in between them that prevents the kind of the connection and the direction that we'd all like to see. So let me explain what I mean by that. 75% of patients say that they would be interested in participating in a clinical trial if it was recommended by their physician. Obviously, the patient-physician relationship is super important, and patients trust their doctors with their care and trust their doctors to kind of think through where they are in their disease progression or their health generally, and what is an appropriate kind of clinical next step or therapeutic next step for whatever they're dealing with. So, there are a lot of interventions that are available for different diseases or a given disease, and really the provider is the expert in sort of ferreting through for this individual patient and wherever they are in their journey, what is really the best next option for them. And patients know that and they respect that. So, but what's amazing is that when you ask patients, of those who are subjects, how many of you found out about the subject from your doctor? In 2021, the answer was only 10% of them found out about a study that they were participating in from their doctor. So patients want to talk to their doctors about it, but they're just not learning about trials from their doctor. And the flip is true as well from the provider's perspective. So here are some stats, pretty amazing from the physician's perspective. When surveyed, 90% of clinicians said they felt comfortable talking to patients about clinical trials, but only 0.2% of them actually do. I mean, that's an amazing disparity. So their heart is in the right place, their mind is in the right place, but it just doesn't happen. And when the same survey, asked, well, why do you not have that conversation with patients? The three most, prevalent answers are basically, I don't know. 54% of them said, I don't know what trials are even available locally or available for my patient. The second most common answer, 48%, I don't know where to refer my patient. And the third most common answer at 33% is I just don't have time to learn about what trials are available. So there's an informational gap that is preventing this most important conversation between doctors and their patients about the availability of trials and their viability as a kind of a next therapeutic option for patients. And that's really, I think, where there's a big divide that we'd like to overcome.
Would you have any insights into how do the other 90% of the patients, the other 90% of the cases where patients do get into a trial where they did not hear it from the physician, where do they get the information then?
Yeah, it's kind of a clumsy mix between heroic actions on the part of study teams and clinical trial coordinators who, whether manually doing chart reviews or using, electronic tools to come up with a list of patients that are decent matches for the trial. Lots of studies can start with a list of patients. Then the question is, well, what do I do with that list? And the most common thing that's done with that list is a manual chase of patients by those coordinators in clinic, or directly reaching out to them. There are some trials that take advantage of direct to patient marketing or sending, emails or postcards or banner ads. I mean, it's a plethora of of either, marketing directly to patients or the clinical trial coordinator kind of manually chasing patients down and informing them about the study. And you can understand why this happens. So, I had a family member who was a clinical trial coordinator, so I know this game quite well. And, if the cardiology division at an academic medical center might be doing 10, 15, 20 different studies, right? So when they have a divisional meeting and a new study is launching at the site, that study coordinator or PI would show up at the big meeting and say, hey, exciting, we've got a new study, and go through some of the inclusion exclusion criteria, which is usually like, 5 or 10 of each, and say, if you see anybody that you think fits, make sure to reach out to us. We're excited about recruiting for this study. And so what happens after that is almost 100% manual. It's the heroics of the providers sort of remembering that there was a study on this subject and what were the details of that. And let me call, the coordinator and try and follow up and see if this patient's a good match. I mean, it's a lot of very inefficient manual chasing. And in some cases, patients themselves will search for trials in their area. Many of them are desperate for, have kind of hit the end of what is available otherwise and are searching for some other, opportunity to rectify their situation. And so they'll go on a search. And I've just heard so many stories from family members and from patients who just searched in vain to try to identify studies that would have saved their family member, perhaps, but didn't. They just couldn't find the studies that were available to be able to, to help their family member. So there's a human toll to this, not just a lot of, from a patient perspective, not just a lot of manual effort on the part of sites to try to recruit these patients.
You've developed a solution that addresses some of these issues. Can you tell us more about the solution that you've built?
IllumiCare has its roots generically as a clinical decision support system. It originally was a tool, and I'll explain kind of what this tool is and how it works for an end user, but it was really developed originally to teach doctors in the hospital about the costs and iatrogenic risks of medications and lab and tests. And so it was developed for a completely different purpose. It was how do you interject some useful insight, some actionable insight into the EMR workflow, into the clinical workflow, without being obstructionist, and we had a unique, in that situation, piece of content that didn't exist in the EMR. It was, that the cost of these medications and tests and some clinical rules and content about when to use a more expensive one or when to repeat test and when not to. And the question was, well, how do we interject these insights, these kind of nuggets of information, when they can be most impactful? What many EMRs have a framework for clinical decision support, and that framework, generally speaking, is either hidden or interruptive. So you generally have one of two choices. You can either have a separate tab or have a link somewhere where the user has to take some action to find the piece of information that you would like them to see. And what we find is that, clinicians are busy and they generally will not click extra, they have enough clicks every day and won't go hunting for something, that they don't consider to be completely necessary to what they're doing, at a given time frame. And then the other way is, that it would kind of issue an alert on the screen. And within the EMR, generally those alerts have they steal your cursor away. You generally have to X them out or OK or cancel or something like that to get them out of the way. And users think of that as fairly interruptive and obstructionist, and therefore you got to be pretty judicious in how you use that. So we essentially said we have to come up with something better than either one of those two options. So we essentially invented something we call the Smart Ribbon, and it runs as a separate application in the same desktop environment where a user is interacting with their electronic medical record. It automatically maintains context with the medical record. So without you ever clicking on something extra, logging in, going somewhere else. Just whenever you start your machine and you log into your EMR, this little program runs automatically in the background. And at all times, it knows who the user is. It understands what role that user plays in the organization. And then as you change patients in the EMR, it makes a call back essentially to us externally and says, I have this user looking at this patient. Is there anything you'd like to tell them? And we use that framework originally to coach, providers around the use and utilization of medications and tests. Our health system, that was very successful, and our health system, customers said, there are other use cases we'd like to use this for. There are other decisions we'd like to influence at the point of care. And we began building additional apps that address different use cases, different decisions they were making. We're now introducing into the market, we already have like 76,000 users, and we already have a number of IDNs and a number of medical practices who are existing users whose decisions we already influence with this tool, and a lot of experience in using this tool to change behavior. And so what we're really kind of now bringing to the market is the utilization of this same framework to recruit trials at the point of care. So it really is about notifying a provider, nudging a provider, if you will, without them having to look or take any extra step, that the patient that they're looking at in the EMR and perhaps in front of them, at the moment in clinic, is a great fit for a trial there locally. Hopefully that will engage, it will create an opportunity for the provider and the patient to have a discussion about that trial. And if they agree that that trial would be a great next option, that provider can click one button and simply refer that patient to the right trial team. That sort of the tool knows who's on the trial team for that given trial. And then they can follow up with the patient and see if they're a great match for the trial and do a consent and kind of work them up for enrollment. So that's kind of the framework. It's sort of taking a tool that is used for something else and applying that tool in this problem space.
That's a very interesting solution and very fruitful for the clinician, the way that I see it. But I am curious, there are many, many trials out there. How do you get the information for your system, and how do you flag the right patient for the right trial?
Great question. It starts with a trial and a list of criteria that you would use to figure out, what's a good patient for this trial. And that's an art, really. When you think about, it isn't about just simply digitizing the inclusion-exclusion criteria that you find in the trial protocol. You really have to understand healthcare data and its strengths and its weaknesses to understand really what is likely to be, a good inclusion criteria that you would sort of dig into patient data to find, and then, or maybe you flip that and make the reverse and exclusion criteria. So it could be, there's really an art to how you frame a query or an algorithm to identify patients that are a good fit for a given trial. We do that in a couple of ways. One, our client sites sometimes have their own method for doing this already. There are a number of systems in place, a number of, most sites have some method, have some clinical trial matching database, whether they use their EMR for that or whether they've created a separate, data lake that kind of, that aggregates all of their data longitudinally over time to enable them to kind of interrogate that for patients that are, a good match for a trial. So our sites can generate their own list of patients based on their existing technologies and simply plug in to us that list and use us just as sort of the last mile, if you will, marketing platform to pop an ad, if you will, at point of care to the right kind of provider that advertises that trial, in the middle of a patient, doctor interaction. But some of our customers say, they value our ability to be able to do the matching ourselves. And so from that perspective, customers that we do that for, the other parts of our business already include us getting a bunch of data feeds from our existing healthcare customers, our health system customers. And so we get all kinds of clinical data today, both discrete and non-discrete, and already have existing systems for extracting and normalizing and building a longitudinal complete data set for the patients of our client health systems. And so we've already built for them, for other purposes, a great data set to use for clinical trials. And this includes the complexities of things like tumor state, extracting tumor staging and mutations and scores and all kinds of things that you find that are really important for clinical trial matching, but you find in text, basically not discretely, but you find it in pathology reports and progress notes and things like that. So we go through the process of in real time capturing all of this clinical data from our customers and, in building a kind of trials enabled data set to be able to kind of bounce criteria off of for a given study. And the beautiful thing and the advantage that we kind of bring to sites when we do it is that, we do it all in real time. It's important because some places that build their own cohorts do that sort of statically. They either do it in the beginning of a study or they do it, it's updated once a month or something like that. And there are a number of studies, like studies that you would want to do in the ED or studies that are inpatient studies that deal with, some kind of degradation in patient condition, like acute kidney injury or something, where you're really trying to catch someone at a certain stage of their clinical development, that you really kind of need to be doing all of the surveillance in real time to be able to figure out, this patient is now meets the criteria that I would want to kind of, indicate to their provider is a good match for a study. So it's a pretty complex process on the back end to just say, okay, this patient is a good match. Then the question becomes, is this provider a good match? And that is something for in each study that the study team determines the kind of provider that they would want to sort of pop a notification that this patient is a good match. And this is also kind of an interesting advantage. I'll quick story at one of our academic medical center sites, a cardiologist said, we have a hypertension study here, but we recruit out of our cardiology clinic patients for this hypertension study. And we have our own coordinators to do that. But to be frank with you, most of the hypertension patients in our population are primarily seen in our primary care clinics and not in the cardiology group, So we have no presence. There are no coordinators who are out in these kind of outlying, clinics. And so it's like a blind spot. And if you can electronically extend our reach, and we can add the primary care providers to the group of patients that can refer their patients into the study, you will vastly increase the kind of population, the patient population that we can effectively recruit from by electronically extending our reach to the practices that are a part of our IDN. And then we have another customer who their situation is that they actually, sort of sub-license use of their EMR to a bunch of not owned, but somewhat affiliated practices in their area. And for them, now they can extend their reach beyond even their site itself to all of these practices who are kind of affiliated with the health system, but not owned by it. So it has these advantages of sort of, which patient is a good fit, what provider is a good fit, and then what geography and how big can you expand the geography and the network that you're recruiting from. And all those things there's complexity in all three of those.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd like to come in on that point, GT. It sounds really fascinating, this technology, and sounds like you're solving a really legitimate problem here. What about the actual... So I get the bit about the patient data and EMR data. What about the actual trial data itself? Because in my mind's eye, you've got thousands of clinical trials potentially ongoing at any point in time. Does your technology kind of search across the whole spectrum of clinical trials that's out there? And if so, what are the mechanics to actually make that work?
What clients have told us is that they would prefer control over what trials are utilizing the platform. And so they want to make priority decisions around that. They want to kind of control the scope of it, which makes sense. I get that. So to really answer your question, at any given site, it's essentially limited to the studies that site allows to be kind of, to use this, what you might think of as kind of point of care marketing platform for their trial. And so that really means that, they get to determine, one study at a time, each study at a time. And then really it's up to the site whether they'll allow studies, that are remote or virtual, that are outside of their network. I mean, they get to make all of those decisions. Okay. And we respect their decision to make that, their ability to make that decision.
Got it. So the site chooses, look, these are the studies we want to be in scope for this type of initiative. And then the technology does the magic work of matching to those studies that they predetermined a good fit for them and what they want to be in scope for this.
Exactly. And then, extends, once you identify those patients, extending this ability, this sort of marketing platform. So I often think of what this is. I mean, I don't know whether it's proper to think of it as a marketing platform, but that might be the most analogous way to think about it. And rather than patient marketing, like rather than putting banner ads and sending emails and doing all this sort of cold outreach directly to patients, you might think of this as a marketing platform at point of care to the provider who is taking care of the patient that is a great fit for the trial. And really it's up to the provider to sort of adjudicate whether, they may fit the criteria, but they're not really a candidate for the trial because they're doing great on their current therapy, right? That could be totally appropriate. Or, they're really struggling. And I love the fact that you've just given me another therapeutic option. Heck yeah, let's do it. So, and the data that gets generated from its utilization is also very analogous to kind of a marketing, what we would traditionally think of. It's almost like we use Google AdWords or Google Ads here. And it's very similar to what you would see in a Google Ads dashboard. There are a certain number of impressions, which would be like the number of times we're nudging a provider that is of the right kind of provider that you've determined for this given study. It's cardiologist and it's primary care, for example, to go back to the hypertension example. So those are the two study types that we're focused on as a referral network for this given study. So while the technology is implemented across the institution, and while the oncologists are seeing nudges about oncology studies, and while the nephrologists are seeing nudges about nephrology studies, they're not seeing any notifications about this, hypertension study. Only the cardiologist and the primary care docs are. So you've got a certain number of impressions. Those impressions lead to a certain number of app opens. Like the way it works is when you get this notification on your screen, you can choose as the user to say, that is interesting. I'm willing to learn more about that study. What are the details? And when you click that or the app icon on the ribbon, it opens the app. And by opening the app, what it reveals is kind of the study description and an overview of it, a link to all the details of the study. You can see who's on the trial team if you want to reach out and contact anybody. Importantly, you can see why this patient is a match. And importantly, that's for clinicians, oftentimes that's what they want to know. The most compelling thing is, no, I'm saying your patient is a match because they have this, this particular disease with this particular histology, with this particular, tumor marker, with this particular, and the more particulars that you're matching on, the more interesting, the more insightful that is to a clinician. I think the more trusting they are of the match that you made, and the more likely they are to kind of consider, this really is a tight fit for this patient. Let me think about it. So there's sort of the ad that you get to write, right? The content of that ad. So you have an impression. You have, once somebody engages with your ad and finds out more information about the study, that will lead to a certain referral rate. Like, do they click to refer? In marketing speak, you can almost think of that as a conversion event. You've had an ad, you've tried to attract someone to your site, they actually clicked it, and now they're landed on your site. Like that in marketing speak is the way you would think about a conversion event. And in the very same way, hey, I've advertised this trial to this clinician about this patient, and they have referred them to the trial team for workup. And ultimately, you then see for the number of those patients that are referred through this platform, how many consent and how many of those enroll. So it very much follows kind of a marketing funnel mentality about kind of bringing the digital marketing tools inside of the walls to a site to be able to kind of leverage that for recruitment for trials.
That's awesome. And who ends up being the ultimate customer, GT? Because I would imagine the clinical trial sponsor stands to benefit from this, because their trial, if appropriately matched to a patient that comes in, is going to be suggested as an option. So that's a good thing for them. And maybe obviously like the sites stand to potentially benefit too, maybe from a financial aspect as well. So yeah, I was curious to understand a bit about that.
Well, you've hit it on the head, Sam. It's exactly that. Both the site and the study sponsor are ultimately our customers. A sites pay a kind of base monthly fee for all of this work, and for it, they get to use this platform to recruit for all their non-industry sponsored studies. So, which is great. They've also get all of their industry sponsored stuff that they're currently doing or about to start up kind of grandfathered in. At some point, for new trials that are starting, we ask the study sponsors to pay a per patient referral fee for patients who are referred through, by these providers to the trial team. And what's really interesting about the transparency that comes, there's two things that you get from this kind of sort of marketing level, Google Ads like transparency that help you to optimize the whole exercise. One of it is you get to see who's getting nudged about the study and not referring. So, an app open rate of 0 and a referral rate of 0 by 1 or 2 providers inside of the division, where the other providers in the division are much more prolific in kind of recruiting for a given study. It really is that kind of insight allows the trial team to have a very specific conversation with those 2 docs, or those 2 providers, to understand, hey, your peers are doing this, you're not. What's the reticence? What are we missing? What can we tell you about? So that kind of feedback and reinforcement and transparency is great. And that is one great way to get things done in healthcare, is to know, hey, we're watching, you're aberrant to your peers. What can we do to get that, to right size that? A lot of times that really is kind of a great way to change behavior. And the other way is this kind of insight is cool, is that for any given criteria that you determine for your patient matching, you sort of have 2 dials with that. You have kind of a sensitivity and a specificity dial. And it sort of works the same way in online advertising, right? You are, for any, let's keep with the Google Ads analogy, for any given campaign, you have the population it is aimed at, you have the particular wording of your ad, and you have, ultimately what your ad says. And the combination of those 3 things delivers some kind of click-through rate and some kind of conversion rate. Well, in the same way, and every good marketing campaign in the world is, does A/B test constantly to tweak those 3 factors and say, are we aimed at the right population? Can I tweak what if I tweak the listing, the way I describe this trial in a different way? Does that affect its click-through rate? Does that affect its referral rate? And ultimately, if I've defined patients a certain way, if I increase the sensitivity and decrease the specificity a little bit, does that capture a much greater, opportunity for me and without negatively affecting the consent rate and the enrollment rate, too much? So all of these things are things that you can tweak and optimize if you've got the insight you have. And this is how every modern marketing campaign works. It's always an A/B test. You're constantly A/B testing to optimize the campaign. And think of this as sort of this kind of digital marketing platform inside of the site that can take advantage of the same kind of techniques.
No, I think it's great. What would happen if, for argument's sake, there were multiple trials that might be a fit for a given patient that had come in to go and see their caregiver physician? How does the system cope with that? Does it present the one that's best fit, or does it give options across the board?
It presents all of the matches to the clinician and orders them by specificity of fit.
Got it.
So what I mean by that is, if a patient has matched on like 6 or 7 unique criteria and is a highly specific match for a trial, that would be listed first. And then, if they're a lesser fit for something else, like, I don't know, they're female, they're between the ages of whatever, and they have a given disease, right? That might be a much more generic kind of a fit for that same disease state. And so ultimately, this is about arming the clinician with therapeutic options. And, we think of, I think often clinicians reach for trials as like a very last option. And when they're desperate to come up with something else because all else has failed. And trials really shouldn't be that way. It should be thought of as part of the clinical armamentarium. And really, it's up to the patient and their provider to figure out where in the patient journey do they plug that, do they fire that arrow, right? And the more and sooner you can inform the clinician about the availability of all these options, the more you help them kind of run through an algorithm in their head, given where the patient is in their journey, when the right time is to sort of pull the trigger on using a trial in that patient. And that's kind of the way we think about it.
Understood. And what's the feedback been like from the physicians? Just going back to your previous point, obviously, there is the potential here whereby physicians might get not called out, but challenged on, look, why are you not referring or enrolling into this trial or clicking on the suggestions as per what the technology's provided to you? Are physicians largely on board here, or have you had any pushback?
Yeah, I mean, we're honestly early in the rollout of this specific, of the Trials app, but here's what we've learned so far. Most of them are super welcoming because of what I just explained. They want options. I mean, nothing. I wish I could. I had one clinician describe to me, the worst place you can be is to not have a good option to offer your patient, right? They're coming to you desperate for a solution, and the last place you want to be is to have nothing efficacious potentially to offer. Mm-hmm. And so no one wants to be there with their patient. And so I think from their perspective, physicians like the idea that we're putting them in control. We respect them as sort of the arbiter. What we hear from docs is that it bugs me when patients are my patient that's doing great on their current therapy signs up for some trial and then comes to me and it's all screwed, and next thing you know, something that was well managed is now gone haywire. Like, that frustrates me. It frustrates me that I might refer somebody to a trial. I never know what happens to them after that, and so just, I think putting them in control, giving them options, and really thinking of trials as just another therapeutic option are all empowering to providers. And I think really, I haven't heard anyone negative about that. I've only heard, appreciating having more options and them still being in the driver's seat.
Got it. Sounds good. And I take it, obviously there's a whole, the landscape for EMR providers is quite vast. Have you had to build individual relationships with each of these providers and try and get technical integrations with all of the providers, or are you able to work to some kind of standard, or does it not even really work like that?
Yeah, I've spent almost 25 years in healthcare technology, and this is doing EMR integrations is always I don't know, an extreme pain point for innovation, let's say. let me say it that way. And so really when we started this company with a different use case, we really wanted to invent a way to sidestep the whole integration problem. And so the ribbon, as I've described it, is not actually integrated inside of the EMR. It is not, we literally can install it on top of and completely independent of whatever EMR we're talking about. So that is a super advantage of the way this works, is that you can extend it to all kinds of, like there are health systems that while the main EMR is one thing, through a period of consolidation or other relationships with lots of other clinics, they really have a plethora of different EMRs in their network. It's one way of consistently recruiting across different affiliated organizations. Like we had a call the other day with someone where the main recruiting site where all the study sponsors are where all the studies are is an Epic health system, but they are associated with a county hospital that they have a pretty tight association with. But the county hospital's on Epic, but this site is on Cerner. And so naturally you just can't stick, there is not one solution that you could kind of stick into both and that looks and feels the exact same way. But this sort of thing that we've come up with that is sort of on top of and distinct from the EMR, it's kind of on the screen in context automatically, but still independent, means that in a situation like that, you could do an install on a Cerner or an Epic shop, and even they're all script clinics and they're eClinicalWorks and they're Athena and all the plethora of clinic EMRs that exist. And yet it still works the same way. It still looks the same way to the end user. And centrally, the trial teams still get the referrals the same way and so forth. So it is kind of a cool, it's kind of a cool attribute of the technology platform that is this kind of point of care decision support platform that we've invented.
That's cool. And we have quite a European based audience, as well as lots of listeners in the US. Is this something that's only relevant in the US at the moment, or are there plans to expand this more globally?
At the moment, it's US based, and all of we have the good fortune to be talking to some of the biggest players in the industry who think it would be a great way to add to their capabilities that they offer globally. And so, I can see it in the not too distant future, certainly crossing the pond and then proliferating elsewhere in the world. So, we certainly understand that research happens everywhere, and we'd love to make it available everywhere that we can.
Awesome. Curious to understand a bit more about what got you into this space, GT. What's the backstory around you, and a little bit more on IllumiCare? That would be awesome.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I have the great privilege of working with, actually I just calculated. So the team that we have here, I've worked with about half of them at prior healthcare tech companies. So we have sort of a history of starting stuff, growing stuff. It gets acquired by some really big company, and then we start something else novel and kind of put the band back together and do it all again. So so it's fun working with people. I calculated earlier that we are today 34 people that have collectively 442 years of healthcare experience. So I don't know if that just makes us old, but the good news is that we have a long history of understanding the detail of healthcare clinical data and its extraction, its normalization, how dirty and awful it is, and how different it is from one health system to another, even though they're all kind of abiding by the same specifications. Those specifications mean very little when it comes to the actual content of what you see. And so at the end of the day, you've got to turn this very dirty, non-standard data set into something that is useful and usable, and then and then add insight to it, derive insight that you can then change a decision, change a behavior that adds value to somebody. And so we've got a long history of doing that in healthcare in lots of different use cases. And as I mentioned earlier, I just sort of came upon this particular use case because, it's in my family history. So I know the space kind of well. I know the challenge well and the frustration. And there's so many patients starved to get access to trials. There are providers who are open and willing, to refer and to consider trials as a therapeutic option. And obviously the sponsors are desperate, because it's so difficult to recruit, to hit your allocation targets and to kind of close the study as fast as possible so that you can get to market. There's so much opportunity cost for every month of delay and kind of getting to the appropriate numbers. So everybody wants the same thing. So that's what attracted me to the problem space. It's a real problem. It's one I kind of had some personal experience with, and our team has had quite a lot of background in dealing with the kind of nuts and bolts of what it takes to build something like this.
No, I think it sounds great, and I'm dying to see a demo at some point, actually, because I just think in essence, it sounds so simple, doesn't it? Like you have a physician sat at his desk seeing a patient, and he has a solution that signposts him, the patient, to potentially a trial that could fundamentally improve that patient's life. And there is zero effort for the physician involved. And I think that whenever you can create a solution like that, it's absolutely fantastic. But so yeah, really curious to see how the journey continues for IllumiCare, particularly in the context of this product. As we start to draw to a close, GT, we always ask our guests the same question at the end of the podcast episode. And that question is, if there was one thing you could change about the healthcare industry, what would that be?
Well, I thought about all the self-serving things I could say, so I'm going to give you one that isn't self-serving. that isn't
self-serving.
About what I've said. No, it's cool. I think my answer to that is a universal patient identifier. One of the most difficult things about healthcare is that we have multiple providers that take care of us. We get tests and procedures done in lots of different places, and the UK has a unified national system. Perhaps it works better there. Here in the US, we suffer from the fact that there is no unique identifier that follows us from different places and at different doctors and at different institutions or hospitals or clinics or whatever. And therefore, as a result of that, it makes the continuity of care difficult. And it makes the research about patients that would be good fits. It makes building a complete longitudinal picture about a patient difficult. And then the general argument against that is just the privacy concerns. And I get that. I mean, I value my own privacy a lot, but these days, I don't know, there are hundreds of marketing companies that basically know everything about me by virtue of my Google Maps usage and my Google Chrome usage and so forth. So I think I'm ready to get over that and say I'd rather the power and convenience that would come from, the ability to tie all my information together in a seamless, record so that it could be used for the betterment of my care. And if we had that as researchers and as innovators, there's lots of cool things that we can do to help patients.
Awesome. A very worthy response to that question. And for the record, even though we have a national health system in the UK, we still don't have that level of joined upness, unfortunately, but I'm sure we'll get there. Where can our guests come to find you, GT, if they want to learn more about you and what IllumiCare are up to both now and in the future?
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's you can find us on the web at illumicare.com. That is ILLUMICARE. And we have a page, an app page about the trials and app, and there's a little video. So in terms of a demo, you can sort of see what it looks like. It's hard for me to describe it, necessarily do it justice just vocally, but if you want to see what it looks like, that's kind of the best way to do a little 2-minute video and see what it looks like.
Awesome. That's great. Well, look, on behalf of Ivana and myself, GT, we really appreciate you coming on Transformation in Trials podcast. And we look forward to watching what IllumiCare gets up to and seeing your ongoing success. Thank you.
Thank you both.
You're listening to Transformation in Trials. If you have a suggestion for a guest for our show, reach out to Sam Parnell or Ivana Rosendahl on LinkedIn. You can find more episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or in any other player. Remember to subscribe and get the episodes hot off the editor.